After that comes 3D lighting and 3D rendering. Now to lighting and rendering, we're gonna go back into the objects that we have created in the beginning of this video, and we're gonna bring them all into the first layer of this 3D viewport or 3D view editor. Bring them back, and now I'm going to create, for the sake of demonstration of lighting and rendering, I'm going to create a plane. While creating this video, pausing and recording again, for some reason I selected Blender Internal Rendering Engine. So I'm gonna select Cycles Rendering Engine back again. Now I'm gonna scale this box all the way up to fill the grid. No reason to do that, just have to scale it up. And now I'm gonna create some lighting. So I'm gonna show you different lights and their purpose or their functions. So press an Alt Shift and then press A to bring the Add Objects menu. Then go down here into the lamp and create a sun lamp. Or let's just first create a point lamp. Now press G to grab this and bring it up. This is a point lamp. This is used for type of light like lamps, bulbs, candle lights, and all the similar type of light that is coming from one point. That's why it's called a point lamp. Let's just press Shift Z to see how it acts. Now, as you can see, the light, let me just bring this down real quick to show you how this acts. As you can see, the objects that are near to it are really bright and other objects are less illuminated or darker. And as it goes near and near, the object or the surface that is really near to it gets a really bright highlight onto it. Now this can be really useful for lighting up our scene. If we have a lot of lights in our indoor scene, we can duplicate all this light and place it like they are placed on the ceiling. And then you just press Shift Z. You can see it is really interesting and beautiful. It almost mimics like real life light bulbs or lamps. Now these are our point lights. Let's just select both of these. Let's just select both of these and delete this. Before we go and go on to the next lighting and delete this, let's just talk a bit about its attributes right here. Now for the surface material or surface shader, the emission node is selected, which is the shader for light. Now if you assign these materials onto a mesh surface, it will also start to act like a light source. If you change this from emission to anything else, I don't think it's gonna work. So let's just select any of these and just test real quick what just happens. As I said, it ain't gonna work. So we have to stick with the emission shader. Now down here you will see the color of the light. You can change it to pretty much anything and it will, I think, the light is lost. Vision shader. No. Okay, the light isn't lost. The strength of it was changed. Hence, it wasn't so strong enough and showing no effects whatsoever. As you can see here, it's showing the real sharp shadows. It wasn't showing that before. Now, again back to the color. As I said before, you can pretty much change it to any color of your choice. And it will illuminate with that color. And as you can see, it's so beautiful to look at how the blue light is reacting with our environment, and it's so realistic and physically accurate because of the cycles rendering engine. Now if you duplicate it and change it to another color, let's just say red, it will show some beautiful coloring, and you can change this to greenish tint. And one more thing, if you bring these lights real close to each other before we delete them, real close to each other, and you really change their color to exact red and blue and green, they are pretty much gonna act or react with each other and gonna create a white light. Almost white light. You see, it's almost white. The rest of the area where all the lights are reaching are white, but where any one or two of these light colors are not reaching, it's creating different colors. Like here, it's just green. Here it's yellow, it means it's red and green, but not blue. Here you can see the blue is reaching. So this is really interesting effect to know because it's physically accurate, and in real life, if you use all these three colors in lighting, whenever they're gonna interact with each other as a reaction, they're pretty much gonna create a white color lighting. So let's just select them all and delete it. Our next light is the sunlight. Now, as the name states, it acts like a light coming from a huge source, such as a sun. Or even you can use it as a skylighting. Changing its position won't affect anything in the scene as far as its lighting is concerned. The source of this light is infinitely far away, like it's coming from infinitely far away. Now, the source is first of all infinitely far away, and the rays are also infinite. So it's infinitely far away, or you can say infinite rays are coming somewhere from infinitely far away. Well, it can represent majorly three different types of light. First one is obvious, as the name suggests, or as the name states, the sunlight. Second one can be the moonlight, and the third and the final in this list can be the skylighting. It can be used for some other lighting as well, which I don't have any idea about now, but there can be some other lighting which it can mimic. But for now, these are the three major light source it can mimic or it can represent. Let's just press Shift A real quick and see what is the effect of this light. Now, one thing you should keep in mind, changing its rotation does change the angle of the light. If you rotate it further away, the shadows are further away from the object, or shadows will become elongated. Now let me show you it in the render view, which is representing the rendered result live. So let me just press R and rotate it outwards, and as you can see, the shadows are elongated, or the shadows change with the direction of the light. Well, I think I just forgot. Let me go back in point. Let me make this a point light. Well, as we have talked earlier, if we change this to 1, it ain't gonna affect much, unless until you bring this really close, or you change the strength of this. Now let's just bring this light a bit down, and let me show you the things that I forgot to address. Now these things are the size and the max bounce. Now this parameter called size, this is the light size for ray shadow sampling. Now what it does is, the lower you go, the sharper the shadows become, and the higher you go, the softer the shadows becomes. Like if we type in 1, you can see the shadow becomes really soft. But this is not what we want. We have to keep it this way, because this is more accurate. One other thing that it does is, the higher you go here, the less noisy your final render gets. In real life, shadows are all sharper and softer as well, depending on the situation. So if you want some sharp shadows, you have to keep it at what it is. Now down here is the max bounce. It's the number of the bounce the light takes before it reaches the camera. Now we will leave it to default, and most likely you will always leave them to default unless and until you know what you're doing. Here, as it says cast shadow, you turn it off and it stops casting shadow. It will stop casting shadow. In this way, it's just gonna contribute to the scene, but ain't gonna cast any shadow whatsoever. You can turn it off and use as a secondary light or bouncing light, which isn't affecting the scene directly. And down here is multiple importance. Using multiple importance sampling for the lamp, reduce noise for real lamp, and sharp glossy material. Well, as it stated, it does the exact same thing. You turn it off and the result is really noisy, and you have to crank the sample up here real high. Now coming back to lamp, we have the preview. It will show you the preview of what your light looks like. As you can see, the sunlight is really blowing up. Spotlight, hemi-light, and area light. Let's just talk about point light for a while. Depending on what light you're using, and also depending on the strand, it will change the preview of the light. Here you will be able to see how your light will look like in the actual render, or as it say, represent how your light is gonna look like in the final render. Now changing back it to the sun and bringing this back down to 1. Now, as you can see, the shadows are somewhat softer. Well, they are kind of clear, but are soft. As you can see, Here you will see the shadow is falling off or decaying eventually, which is not the way sunlight reacts. As I told you about this before, in order to bring sharpness in your shadow, making them crispy or tighter, you have to bring them down quite a bit. This is more like a sunlight. Whether it's a sunlight or a moonlight, and you can see it's kind of more realistic as compared to before. It's kind of changing the way it looks. So, as I was saying, not only sunlight have sharp shadows, moonlight as well have this look, crispy tighter shadow, though the energy is really less than the sun, but the shadows are really sharp. Definitely we can tell it doesn't feel like sunlight. Sunlight should be more strong than this. So if we type in 5, we can see it's somewhat looks like a bright sun or something. Yeah, 3 is doing a great job. Now if we type 1, it's not moon because it's really bright, or it's really dim sun or something, maybe some other light. This light doesn't look like 100% sunny. 100% sunny, it's really less stronger. Maybe there are clouds around this environment. Now in order to make it moonlight, we have to crank this reel down. So we'll type this, and this is almost like a moonlight. Let me crank this up a bit and see if it does look like moon. Yeah, I think this now starts to look like a moon. Let me dial this down, or not, maybe, or make it into a blue, dark bluish shader, and grabbing the sun back again and typing 0, 1 or 0, 2, maybe 0, 1, and this kinda looks like your nighttime, though the look of the background is really bright. Should be something like this to look like a night. Let's just change everything back to normal, and let's just talk about another type of light. That is the spotlight. Now we'll grab it and bring it up as well, and maybe just adjust the angle a bit. And now we're gonna press Shift Z to see how it looks like. As you can see, this light actually, let me go into the light and let me type real quick 200 and maybe dial this down back. Not too harsh, like that. Somewhat like that. As you can see, as you can tell, it's the light that is used in theaters to bring audience focus to a specific character or an object or whatever they want to bring on. This is that light. This type of light can be used for several different types of light, like a torch light or a headlight or anything that is similar to this one. This light comes from a cone-shaped object and illuminates everything in its way. It just acts as a light that is trapped in a cone, and anything within this area will be illuminated. Our next light is hemilight. And before we go into hemilight, I just forgot to show you. Let me delete this and create sunlight back again. bring it up. You will see the shadows right here. And thank God we just turned off the world's illumination strength or the world's lighting strength down. You will be able to see this light casting some shadows, some crazy shadows, which is kind of really cool. But if you remember, I said this light can be also used as a skylight. Now, how to do that if it's creating some sort of shadows? Skylight doesn't create any shadow. They come from all the different directions. Now, how do we do that? As I told you before, the size, changing this attribute or factor will affect how your shadows look. So we kind of know if we crank it down, the shadows will get tighter and tighter, as you can see. If you dial it all the way down to 2 or 3, the shadows are really tight. And heck, we say 0, the shadows are abnormally tight. It's not even physically accurate. But the same way, if we're gonna crank it all the way to 1, it will start to act like a skylight. Okay, all the way up to 1, all the shadows will kind of like there disappear. And it will act like a skylight, especially if you change the direction to vertical to the ground. And make sure it's vertically down. You will see that this light, let me show you in the live image. See? It's not even vertically down, it's just hanging there somewhere. And you bring it all the way down. Now, if you change it even higher, like 1.5, maybe it will be too much. I think 1 is pretty much enough. Or 1.1 maybe. 1.2. 1.1, let's just say. Because we kind of need some shadows, even for the skylight. Change its color to somewhat bluish kind of tint. Imagine if the sun is gone and there's only skylight. I'm not talking about the nighttime, just talking about maybe for some reason the sunlight is not reaching the earth, but it's just spread in the atmosphere and hence the skylight is coming down to the earth. It will kind of look really cool. And everything will look like this. If you duplicate this light, put it here, and change the direction slightly, change the color, and maybe even the strength, or this first, change the size, and maybe size should be dialed down to this. And even higher the strength a bit. It almost looks like a sunlight. As you can see, it really mimics how good Cycles is. You can already see that it brings so much realism into its small unrealistic scene. Just imagine if you have to make a fully formed scene that has to look realistic, and you have put all your effort and you have that skills, talent and experience, you're gonna make a really good scene or a really good render from this. Now you can see it really makes into sun and sky by just choosing the sunlight. Now deleting these two lights and coming to the next light, our next light, which we already have created but deleted because we just forgot to explain, or I just forgot to explain to you about the sunlight completely. Bring this up, and what is this? This is a hemi-light, and it is, first of all, it's showing us some shadows, which it should not, because basically it is a skylight. For some reason it's acting odd. Let me just go and real quick make this semi-light. Well, this light is mostly used in Blender internal renderer. For this renderer, we can use the sunlight for the same purpose. We don't have to use and adjust it to meet our requirements or match the skylight for our scene. But if you want to do that, you can do it by the same method. Just uncheck the cast shadow and make it somewhat bluish, desaturate it a bit, and a bit higher values, and creating a sunlight. Which will have less bounce and which will be stronger than this one. But as you can see, there's something missing. There's something about this light that doesn't look real. So we can just use the sun lamp for this purpose. Next light is called the area light, and this is the last light in this list. Bring that up and you will be able to see it just illuminate the entire area. Let me just show you real quick what it is. Let me create a portal, or not a portal. Let me show you by bringing the size up. You can see there is this area which is gonna illuminate this scene. Now this type of light is useful for soft or LED screen, LCD screen, monitor, or any type of digital screen, some soft lighting or other type of similar lights that have rectangular area, and those emit from not a point but an area. And it will be really best to use it for LED or LCD screens. Since we are done with explaining the lighting, let's just create real quick rendering from this. For this purpose, let's just create a sphere as another 3D object. Press Shift A to bring up the add menu and go into the mesh, create UV sphere. Bring it up and back a bit and place it down here. Smooth it out, and let's just move them right in the center, right? Or either let's just bring it out and somewhere, I don't know where it can fit. Select the plane and scale it out a bit, so just to make room for everything. Now add a sunlight and Let's just render and see. Make it softer and then see what it does. .5 is enough, and make it 0.5 and make it blue. Yes, that's fine. Now the saturation is about 0.45 and the strength is up to 1, which is kind of looking good, what the skylight should look like. Now let's just duplicate this light and rotate it a bit in any direction you like, and change the size to 0.02. Change the saturation to somewhat like 1.3 something, and hue to 20 or something like that, and change the strength to 2, depending on the shadows. I think it should be 1.5. And let's just make it a bit more saturated to see if things looks great, or if they don't, make them less saturated. I think about 90 or 100 is perfect. Let's just make it 100. And before making 100, let's just see where the spectrum lies. So dial the saturation all the way up and just try to change the hue. When you find it perfect, dial it back to 100, or just make it 130 hue and 130 saturation. This is good. Yeah. Making it a bit more selecting this light, a skylight, and saturating it a bit more, and shifting a hue slightly towards this sky blue spectrum. And I think if I just dial it up a bit, it's going to look better. Yeah, it looks better this way. And 2 looks a lot better. Let's just do 1.5 and 3. Double. Lighting is perfect. Now let's create some material and do the rendering to complete this stage, and then we will move on to the simulation, which is the next and the final stage. To do that, first let's just bevel the edges of these three objects, because in real life objects don't have perfectly sharp edges, whereas these objects have perfectly sharp edges. In real world, the edges of any surface is bit rounded and bit smoother than what we are seeing right in front of us. So let's just go and click any one of these objects, go into the Modify tab and click this where it says Add Modifier, and click onto the bevel or add a bevel modifier onto this object. And as you can see, the corners are not sharper anymore. And now you can see it has beveled all of its edges and corners. So in the bevel properties, let's just dial down the width a bit down to 0.03 and add 1 or 2 segments more. I think 2 segments are perfect. Add a few segments, and I think dial it down somewhat more. Dial the width down to 0.02. And here under the operator region of the 3D view editor, in the tool shelf, come down here. In the edit panel under the shading, it gives you 2 options. One is smooth and other is flat. Click on the smooth button and it will activate the smooth shading for this object. And when you will render this, you will notice that the shader or the object looks much more realistic. Do same for these 2 objects as well. Going into the modifier, adding bevel, applying 0.02 and adding 2 segments, and then adding this or activating smooth shading for this. Go back and now let's just click on this sphere first and go into the material tab and add or click on this new button, and it will add a new shader for this surface. Going under the surface panel right next to the surface, click this button and it will give you a list of surface shaders to choose from. Now choose this glossy BSDF for the surface shader type and crank the roughness a bit up to 0.01. And as you can see, it is a really reflective metallic bar. Now before we go any further in this tutorial, let's just go into the file and in the user preference click on the system, and from here where it mentions the cycles compute device, click or choose the graphics card option you have. In my case it's CUDA GeForce GTX 950 display, and close this window. Go into the renders tab and under the render where it's mentioned the device, choose the GPU compute device from here. Now what it will do, it will allow the graphics card to do all the calculation instead of putting all the load on the CPU. So if we hit Shift Z, and the calculation happens much faster as compared to the CPU. Well, the difference is unnotable in this rendering or this scene in particular, but if there is any other scene, the difference is notable. Now, let's just finish creating materials for this scene. Click this object and let's first split this area into two and choose a node editor in this upper area. Now it will give us shading network for the material of the selected surface, or the node network for the material for the selected surface. Now, note one thing, that whatever editor we are choosing, according to that our add list changes. So in this case, our add list changes to all the needed node for adding or creating a shader or material. So if we have selected a node editor and we are in the material mode, it will give us a list of options to add a node for creating a particular type of shader. Now let's just create a couple of nodes to create or complete this material for this box. So press Shift A, go into the shader here, and in the shader, first let's create a mix shader. What it does is it gives you a couple of layers to add two different BSDF shader to add into one surface. Now let's just create a glossy BSDF and add into the upper layer of this mix shader to add into this one surface node or one surface input. Crank the roughness down a bit and change it to this option. I don't know how to pronounce this, but change it to this. This will work better than the other. Let's just leave this down a bit. Now go into the add list again, and this time go into the input, the very first option in this list, and add the Fresnel or the Fresnel node into the scene. Now there are several different types of nodes. One is the shader nodes, the output, the input node, the texture, the color, the vertex and converter. We are adding the input node. We will add this node into the factor of this mix shader. This way, what it will do is it will make this shader, or it will make this shader, or it will affect what it will do. What it does is it affects the factor or whatever value you plug into in a way that whatever surface is directly facing to the camera, it will give you the value approaching the 0, and the surface that is not directly facing to the camera or is at an angle or is facing away or at 90-degree angle from the camera, it will give you the value of 1 on that surface. This way, whenever the surface is facing directly to the camera, the diffuse material appear more on the surface, and when the surface is facing away from the camera, the glossy BSDF or the reflection appears more on that surface. This is more physically accurate and more realistic. So once we hit Shift Z, you can see it appears much more realistic as compared to these two objects. So first, let me go into the Material tab, and in the preview, let's just type 10, and for render, let's just type 20, because this is just for explaining how you go through different process, how you go through different stages and do different things in Blender and cycles, rather than in detail or in-depth tutorial for rendering. So we will keep things simple and just to explain how things are done in Blender. Now moving on to the next object, and I will choose this chair for this purpose because we are about to explore different material for this. So this time, let's just add again a mix shader, plug it in, and this time move the diffuse BSDF to the upper layer of this object and add a subsurface scattering and plug it into the first input layer of this shader and add the image texture into the color of this node. Now if we preview this, what we should see is a much more let me see. Let's crank up the material a bit. Okay, now let's move it back a bit and add another or duplicate this mix shader and add it here. Now go into the add list and add a glossy for this material as well. Place it down here and plug this node into the second input layer of this mix shader. Crank this down a bit and add a Fresnel or Fresnel input node and then plug it into the vector just like before. Now what you will see is this chair looks much more plastic than this one because it has somewhat a translucency or subsurface scattering in it. It makes it appear much more like a plastic chair. If you want the translucent effect to be much more prominent, then let's just plug it directly into the first layer of this mix shader and then let's just render it. And change it to this and let's just see. There is a huge difference if you have noticed it. Now this is in between of both of them. It's not showing a very strong translucent effect and it's not completely diffuse either. It looks much more plastic than the other objects in the scene. No, I'm happy with this result. I hope you're understanding how I'm creating the material and how shading in Blender Cycle works. Moving on to the last object. Now let's just create a different type of a material for this one. Let me create a first refractive material for this one. Now crank the roughness up a bit so it gives us a foggy glass look. And I have a feeling that I want this. Let's dial it down this a bit. Or up a bit. I think it's too much. Okay, let's just dial it down and okay. Going back into the shader network of this house-like object or something, like it's like more like a dog house or something. I just forgot what it's called, but going back into it make me think that it is too dark. So what I want to do is I want to go into the color and add a bright and contrast. This way we will be able to lower the or how about we just go into color RGB mix, add this up here, make it full white and add into here. All we have to do is adding it. Change the mixing type to add or the blend type to add, and then, well, the blender was crashed and I figured after blender was crashed and I had to stop the recording, I opened it up again and I figured that the bright and contrast node works better than this mix RGB node. So I plugged that in and the adjusted values are 0.8 for brightness and 0.8 for contrast. And as you can see here, the result in the preview looks like this, and in the final render view it's kind of looks like this. So I'm happy with this. The materialing is done, so now let's just do or create a final render just to know the process of rendering in Blender. Then we will move on to the simulation. So to render it out, let's first create a 3D camera by going into the 3D viewport editor and pressing Shift A to bring the add menu and going all the way down above the lamp. It will give you an option to create a camera. Click on this and you will create a 3D camera. Without selecting or deselecting anything, press G to grab it and bring it out. Now we can adjust this camera by any of these move tools, or sorry for that, by mistake I have brought this 3D cursor here. So press Shift S and say cursor to center. Now we can manipulate from any of these move tool or transform tool. You can manipulate and control the camera, but the best way to do so, by the way, we can also scale the camera up and down, but I don't think it will affect anything. So now the best way to control a camera is to go into the camera view. To do so, all you have to do is press 0 on the numpad and you are in the camera view. Now by default, I think I have already selected this lock camera to view. It will be like this. You can check this box and you are able to rotate and pan around or zoom in and zoom out through this camera. This way you can locate or position your camera anywhere you want and have any sort of view from any sort of angle you want of your scene. And by default, when it's not selected, if you try to move or do anything, it comes out of the camera mode. So remember to always check this box. And let's just merge these two regions into one. Press N and T to move everything out of the way. Actually press N to bring that back and 0 out the Y rotation, since you can see it's kind of tilted or rotated in a weird angle. Press 90 for it. Press 90 for this one. Now we know the camera is exactly straight or something. And now let's just take a view where you cannot see the background. And before doing anything, let's just go into the rendering tab in the property editor and check this border under the dimension panel. Check the borders. By default it will be unchecked. You have to just check it. What it does is it just renders everything that is inside the border of the camera. Everything outside it will not be rendered. So this will save a lot of time and it won't put that much pressure on GPU or CPU. As you can see, it looks pretty cool for such a short tutorial, just to explaining how different things are done in Blender. Now, for rendering, you have several of attributes and parameters to change or to adjust to render a image or animation the way you want. Different settings gives you different result, and the more the settings are accurate, the more realistic result you get. So for that, first of all, for rendering, well, these buttons just render the animation and it controls a few of other different options for rendering. This render panel is just to control basic rendering, and below that you will see dimensions. Now under the dimensions you will see resolution, aspect ratio, frame range, frame rate, and time remapping. Now for now I've never changed time remapping, so I don't know this, but in the later video I will check what this does and I will explain it to you. So for the resolution, as it stated, as everybody knows, it